Hey everyone, welcome to the Open Inquiry Podcast. My name is Danylo. So this is episode 3 of the podcast, and it's another solo episode, so I won't be interviewing anyone. My general plan going forward is to alternate episodes between the interviews and these solo reflections. So today's topic is anger, and the reason I want to talk about this particular emotion is because I used to have really severe anger issues. But through a few particular life experiences and personal reflections, I seem to have genuinely resolved this problem for me, to the point where I can confidently say that I haven't gotten angry in something like 5 years at this point. I'm almost 27 years old now, so that's approximately since I was 22. Now, you can believe me or not about this, and there's a legitimate question about what anger even is and how you can know you feel it. I'll get into that shortly. But in this episode, I'll describe the crazy, messy, personal experiences of mine that got me here, and the psychological realizations that I've had about it. There are a surprising number of powerful insights to be discovered when you really take the time to inspect the way anger arises in your mind, the forms it takes, how it feels, and why it even happens. To start, I'll briefly describe my somewhat embarrassing history with anger. After that, I'll take some time trying to define and characterize anger as an emotion. This gets surprisingly complex. Thirdly, I'll describe the difficult stage of my life when I discovered how to stop getting angry for good. And then lastly, I'll list 3 concrete psychological strategies that I use for outsmarting anger, as I like to put it. Okay, so to start, let me briefly describe just how bad my anger management issue was. As you listen to me here, I'd encourage you to consider times when you've gotten angry. Maybe they're recent, maybe not, but anger certainly arises at some point in everybody's life. And while my angry episodes may not sound relatable to you at all, you can conduct this same analysis I'm going to outline here on your own anger. So think carefully about your history with this very natural emotional experience. Throughout my adolescence, I regularly had outbursts of anger. During these fits, I would generally punch things and scream and cry. In fact, I punched a hole in a door once when my mother instructed me to go outside to help her garden, and I was busy with something. I don't even remember what at this point. Maybe I was studying, maybe I was playing video games. I still have a photo of this door, and every time I visit my parents, the door is sitting there in the basement reminding me of my youthful rage. It's not in use anymore, it got replaced, but the damaged door is just in the basement, out of use. Fortunately, I never found myself punching people in anger, with the one exception of my younger brother, for which I'm deeply sorry and I've expressed as much to him. Shout out to my brother Ivan, who is a Twitch streamer by the name of Zubsauce. I used to play basketball pretty obsessively during the summer, and Ivan was always able to beat me in one-on-one games. He used his height and wingspan to his advantage and consistently outplayed me, despite my extensive practice. Considering his younger age and my self-esteem issues, this was deeply frustrating, and I would sometimes explode in a rage at Ivan, sometimes throwing the basketball at a wall, or at him, and screaming and crying. I think maybe even once or twice I attacked him. And then of course a week later I'd challenge him to another one-on-one, and he was very slick with the trash talk, which made it irresistible to fall into yet another emotional defeat. Now, I think it's worth touching on regret here a little bit, because looking back, I know that I really hurt Ivan and potentially even traumatized him. I do in some way regret that part of my life. But as I feel regret, I have to ask myself what's the best way to respond to this emotion. And I realize that I simply can't change the past. My first instinct is, well, why don't we fix all of that? But we can't fix it, we can't change it. So what I've done instead is try to grow from it and reconcile these things with Ivan. I've talked to him about it and apologized to him explicitly, and he's forgiven me. And we maintain a very healthy relationship at this point. So there is a positive way to look back on these experiences. I think our relationship has in fact become stronger and closer because we've reconciled those issues. Those issues made us get closer because I was able to face my biggest weaknesses since then, and Ivan has enabled that by being supportive, loving, understanding, and forgiving, ultimately. Regret can encourage a productive, healthy approach to resolving problems and improving relationships in the present, rather than harping on the past. And indeed, I did damage many of my relationships in my life as a result of anger. Ivan was not the only one, he's just the simplest example to provide here. Moving on though, the thing that got me angriest above anything else was the wind. Every time the wind bothered me, it felt like the universe was torturing me. It felt like if there was a god, it was trying to torture me using the wind. I grew up with very long curly hair, and it would get way out of control if the wind picked up at all. And I was a teenager, so I was very self-conscious and superficial about my appearance, so this happened many times. I remember vividly one time I was walking home from school, and every time the wind blew, I'd get angrier until, at one point, I screamed out loud. I screamed some swear words at the top of my lungs to nobody in the middle of a road on my street, because I felt helpless. I felt completely useless and victimized by this force of nature and each new instance of wind blowing felt like another insult to my being. Why doesn't the wind care about my feelings? Maybe some of you can sympathize with this, and maybe some of you think this is completely absurd, but once again, I want to encourage you as you're listening to think of which things get you angry. What are some contexts in which you find yourself angry? Who in your life frustrates you? Do strangers frustrate you? Family members? Friends? Communities or social movements? Do you have any pet peeves? Even if you don't think you have a significant problem with anger, this reflection can be very insightful. While my specific angry episodes may not resonate with you, anger is anger. And ultimately, the contextual details don't really matter. When you feel anger, it's the same anger as my anger. This is actually quite a profound realization that has really impacted me in recent years. We often judge others for getting angry, but we rarely exercise the same judgment in our own direction. We feel like our version of anger is the right one, the valid one, the one that should be allowed and is necessary even. Anger is so obviously bad when we don't agree with it, but so obviously important and valuable when we do. However, when you truly face your anger honestly, as I hope to illustrate in this episode, it becomes rather obvious that it's toxic. It's clearly not your best side. In a moment, I'll describe a few thought experiments that can bring you to this understanding. The flip side of facing your own anger is that you begin to realize that every angry person is just a victim of their mind, and it's not their best side either. It becomes much easier to empathize with an angry person and even forgive them for their misdeeds, recognizing that anger totally poisons judgment, and it has for you too, even if your actions weren't as consequential as others you may witness. Maybe you never attacked a sibling for beating you in basketball, but you probably have wanted to do similarly unhealthy things when anger has taken over. And you may even have followed through on some of those impulses. In any case, I can honestly say that I had a deep problem with anger, and it manifested frequently throughout my daily life in a wide variety of contexts, from screaming fits as a child to serious conflicts with friends and family. Having clarified this, I'd like to go into some detail on what anger even is. This is actually a much more complex question than it initially may seem. Anger seems to always begin with noticing a problem. Your family member is being treated unfairly, someone is threatening to physically harm you, the wind is blowing your hair into a curly, chaotic mess, your coworker is spreading false rumors about you, someone on the internet is misrepresenting your argument, etc. Each of these situations seems to entail some problem for your life. You feel like you're at some disadvantage in achieving your goals. But it's essential to recognize here that anger is not simply noticing and interpreting a problem. Anger is an emotion that comes after a problem has been noticed. And while it's difficult to distinguish it, it seems to arise from other deeper negative feelings. If you really take a moment to inspect it, anger is this awful mixture of deep sadness, desperation, fear and anxiety, this fear that you won't find a solution to the problem and you'll be tormented by it forever, or that you'll have to do some drastic thing like end a relationship to solve it. For me, anger also involved fixation, a neurotic obsession with the problem causing me to repeatedly, continually think about the bad aspects of the situation. And lastly, anger always seems to include some level of pure hatred. When I was angry, I truly hated the people involved, the elements of society and culture that led to it, and maybe I even hated my whole life at those times. So one might define anger as simply a combination of negative emotions operating at a high intensity. It's this deeply negative sensation in your mind and body that starts to appear after your mind has noticed a problem. Your heart rate and blood pressure rise, your muscles tense up, your face turns red, tears may form in your eyes, and you suddenly want to behave in extremely disorganized, erratic ways. Now, there are two reasons that we tend to automatically justify our anger. We either claim that it is necessary to solve the problem, or that it is necessary to notice the problem to begin with. I'm going to respond to both of these now, beginning with the first and simpler one. While we often feel that anger is necessary to solve a problem, the simple answer here is that anger is very hasty. Anger wants to fix this problem immediately with brute force, but it's so hard to take the time to find a solution because your emotions are rushing you, so you start yelling, or punching, or insulting, or you freeze in a ball of rage. You don't even take the time to understand all of the layers of the problem. The deep irony here is that this particular emotional response to the problem actually makes it much harder to solve the problem. And, in cases when there is either no actionable solution to the problem, or no real problem to begin with, anger makes it virtually impossible to honestly recognize this. Now, there are some very, very unique edge cases that may be coming to mind right now that feel like they justify this spontaneous, chaotic response that anger invokes. When discussing anger with the high school classes I was teaching last semester, the students began raising their hands and passionately shouting out increasingly absurd scenarios in which anger seems to make perfect sense. Mr. Z, what about if someone's chopping your arm off? What if you were being skinned alive? What if someone was trying to murder your entire family? What these hypothetical situations show is not that anger is ever necessary, but that there are times when the energy and chaos that anger invokes in you happen to lead you to the best solution to the problem. If someone's trying to chop your arm off and you find yourself angry with them, your aggressive reaction might resolve the problem highly effectively. Maybe you push him away, maybe you punch him and knock him out, and then you call the police. But the key point here is that this is lucky. Because you have no control during your anger, you fail to actually make sure that your solution is effective. There is no intentionality to your approach, it's just a blind attempt. And in the vast majority of commonplace cases in life, your angry response actually isn't optimal, and it's often counterproductive. It often makes the problem worse, not better. In fact, even in these extreme scenarios imagined up by my students, anger can often be suboptimal too. Ask a jiu-jitsu specialist whether or not anger is needed to fight someone, and their answer will probably be absolutely not. It's probably quite hard to make the smartest combat choices when you're blinded by rage, so you end up creating weaknesses that a calm enemy can exploit. If we're going to imagine hypothetical scenarios here, the one in which you can completely calmly calculate the most effective solution to your problem should be considered too. And this one never involves anger. It involves composure, stability, and level-headedness. Now, I'd like to respond to the second justification that we give for our anger, that it's necessary to notice a problem. This points to a fascinating chicken and egg problem. Which came first, knowing about the problem or getting angry about it? This is an important question because noticing a problem is often a subconscious process. Sometimes our subconscious notices a problem and we begin to feel negative. And then this negative sensation in our body and mind brings the problem into our conscious awareness. But it's obscured and shrouded in negative emotion. So maybe you weren't dealing with a particular problem until all of these negative emotions compiled into an angry outburst. You may notice this process often depicted in movies and TV shows. Someone is quietly suffering about a problem and trying to ignore it, often the actions of their romantic partner, for example, and then one day they suddenly give up and reveal the problem to their partner in anger, thus also admitting it to themselves consciously. Unfortunately, movies often present this as a necessary action, and it's true that it does entail honesty and communication, which are important, but the vital truth is that this is not the only way to deal with problems. As I mentioned earlier, anger seems to be rooted in other negative emotions, and if you can be more attuned to your emotions and thoughts, you can notice the problem far before the emotions compile into anger. Even more, it's possible to notice a problem without feeling any negative emotions. This may sound impossible, but once you've done this even one time and noticed it, it becomes obviously preferable. Consider a problem in your life right now. Maybe you need to quit some unhealthy habit. Maybe you need to engage in a healthy one more. Maybe you haven't told someone important in your life about something. This problem probably provokes some negative emotions in you. Maybe shame, maybe sadness, maybe anxiety. Now just take a moment to observe that the problem itself is entirely separate from the emotions. You can strategize about a problem, with paper and pencil even, without feeling the emotions. In theory, this is completely doable because the emotions, by definition, are not the problem. They are a separate phenomenon. What I've just described is the simple and beautiful process of mindfulness, and any meditation teacher will point out that negative emotions don't really exist until they're conceptualized and identified with. I won't go any further on mindfulness here, because that's a long and complex conversation in itself, but I'll simply say that meditation is a vital skill for dealing with all negative emotions, and anger is certainly no exception. It is possible to notice a problem and deal with it without feeling the negative emotions. Sure, maybe your anger does point you to a problem sometimes, but that doesn't mean you should maintain it as a mental habit or pattern. There are better ways to notice your problems. So the two important points here so far are 1, anger is not intrinsic to simply noticing a problem. It's an extra step of emotional and physiological reaction to the problem. And 2, anger is far worse at helping you find solutions than you think. And this second point leads into another fascinating observation, the fact that we instinctively want to defend our anger. Anger is such a powerful emotion that we identify with it to a profound degree, and no matter how rationally someone can point out that our anger is foolish and unhelpful, we search and search for an explanation for why it's necessary. But it's not necessary in any objective sense. We just feel this strange thought of, this is my anger, and my anger is justified and important and necessary. Anger actually tricks us into loving it and thinking that it's an important part of who we are as individuals. It seems that this is due to anger's connection to our values and interests. If we want our friends and family to be happy and safe, then we get angry when that is threatened. and then we identify with the anger, thinking it represents us, rather than the love of our family and friends. We begin to conflate the emotions of anger with the values that lead to them. Anger does this bait and switch, leading you to identify with the worst part of having values, the negative emotions that might arise. Sometimes the internet manipulates us with this in complex ways, and we find ourselves completely wasting hours upon hours yelling at strangers on social media, and then subsequently identifying even more deeply with our outrage. You might type out, "Capitalism is evil," or you might type, "Socialism is evil," and the angrier you get in this online debate, the more you feel that you need to cling to this opinion. You think that this opinion defines you as a person, so it's harder to let go of it, and nearly impossible not to get angry about it. This identification process is truly fascinating. You start with a personal value. You notice some problem arising that's related to that value. Then you feel a range of negative emotions, and you define yourself by the emotion and the value more deeply, which makes you more prone to the negative emotions. And so the vicious cycle continues. This is very much worth examining in yourself. Is your time on the internet spent feeling outraged? Why is that? Do you feel that this is a healthy, productive exercise? You may notice your intuitions right now immediately trying to defend this mental habit, but try to counteract that and ask yourself the following questions honestly. Is there a better way for you to be engaging with your values more generally? Is your outrage optimal? Okay, so having separated anger from the actual process of noticing a problem, I'd like to describe the difficult stage of my life when I began to realize just how problematic anger was itself, and then it started disappearing. There was someone in my life who also had deep anger issues, and we frequently got into large, unhealthy arguments. If there's anyone in your life with whom this occurs, could be a coworker, a friend, a family member, a romantic partner, I'd encourage you to think of them as you're listening here. There have actually been a few people in my life like this, but one in particular, and every time he had an emotional episode, I got angry. I got frustrated because I couldn't help the situation. I got frustrated because his emotions were so difficult. And then sometimes he would get angry directly at me, and I would get really angry back. And one day after some random argument, I was reflecting on what happened and I noticed that my anger consistently makes things worse. It suddenly seemed so obvious to me, especially in the context of engaging with someone I love who also gets angry. I realized that if his anger is making the situation worse, then mine must be too. But I can't control how someone else feels or behaves, I can only control how I feel. So then I tried to apply this during our conflicts. I vowed that the next time we argued, I'd try to do the exact opposite and be completely honestly loving instead of angry. I'm reminded of the Seinfeld episode here called The Opposite, in which George Costanza, frustrated with how his life is going and how many failures he's encountering, decides to do the exact opposite of his usual behavior. In fact, there's this great line when Jerry says to him, "If every instinct you have is wrong, then the opposite would have to be right." Now, this is obviously a very extreme comedic scenario, but I really did try to do something similar here with my anger, and I wasn't sure how successful it would be. But what I noticed is that the situation was better in many ways if I actually managed to do it. Now, it's true that sometimes I also noticed my friend would get angrier when I said kind things to him, so I needed to figure out how to engage with a person who's angry and not be overly kind so as to seem condescending or inauthentic. But after an argument, I would at least be able to honestly say that I felt okay during that, and that I was not actively worsening the conflict by saying misguided, hurtful things, not adding fuel to the fire. While this change didn't work consistently right away, I still got angry on many occasions from then on. It slowly became more and more consistent. The simple realization I had was that I don't have to get angry when my friend is angry at me. I can be kind in response and actually ask my friend what I can do differently to help. And if I don't agree with his suggestion, I can try to explain that respectfully, so we can find a different compromise. I realized that my goal in these situations was not to defend myself, it's to make us both happy, and that anger has literally never enabled this, even though it feels like it is in the moment when you're angry. This is just a mental trick. As I started consciously trying to be kind and loving during disagreements with my friend, I also noticed another profound fact. I don't like how anger feels. It's not that navigating a disagreement ever feels great, but I noticed that going through it calmly and rationally always felt more peaceful. This was counterintuitive because I had subconsciously assumed that anger felt good. It was my effort to fight for what is right and defend myself, so why would it feel bad? But if you actually try to engage a disagreement calmly, you'll quickly notice that it's much more relaxing and stable. Your body is less tense, you're more attuned to your underlying anxieties, fears, insecurities that often manifest as anger. So instead, maybe you can take a moment to communicate those feelings to your friend. You can suddenly be vulnerable, and this is deeply empowering. As it turns out, vulnerability and honesty about your insecurities and fears actually makes you feel stronger and more capable. Suddenly, you have access to inner peace during turmoil, at least some form of peace. You may still be sad when there's an argument, but sadness is just one component of anger underneath it. And if you can just restrict yourself to being sad and stand your ground, you can help the situation. You can genuinely apologize to your interlocutor and try to have a rational discussion about the problem. Even if you don't feel like you did something wrong, you can apologize for your miscommunications, admit that you've been behaving imperfectly and that you're a flawed person, because these things are true, you're not perfect. And when you let go of anger, it's much easier to just admit that. And if your interlocutor remains angry, then you can leave the situation. You can tell them, I may have to step away if you continue to be angry like this because it's making things difficult for me, but we can return to the conversation later when we're both calmer. After you've tried this even just once, you'll notice that it felt so much better. Afterward, you can reflect on it and be happy and proud even of what you did. You can think, wow, I just did that. I said what had to be said in response to an angry person while staying calm and loving. You accomplished something that is truly difficult, but consequentially good. So you should take the time to appreciate that, and it will automatically feed into your future actions, even just a little. But you can only realize this when you try it, which I admit is much easier said than done. Lastly, I'd like to simplify everything I've said here to 3 psychological reflections, sort of like 3 keys to outsmarting anger. Now, I'm not saying that these reflections constitute a magical solution that will work for everyone, but it may help you consider anger differently. These reflections don't require behavior or habits or incorporating some system into your life. All you need to do here is simply engage in these reflections even just once. The first reflection is that anger doesn't feel good. This may sound obvious in one sense, but anger has this amazing ability to convince us that we want it, that we like it, and that it's a part of who we are. The next time you get angry, try to observe how it actually feels in the moment. And then another time, if you can stay calm in a similar situation, notice how that feels. You may find that you feel more loving, more confident, more stable, and genuinely helpful. If you can honestly observe this difference, it may change how you approach many situations in your life. This understanding may feed into your behavior without you even having to try hard to make it so. The second reflection is, anger is never necessary to find a solution, and it's often counterproductive. So the next time you get angry, once you've calmed down, consider how much your anger actually helped you engage the problem. Did you solve the problem? If so, was your solution effective and efficient? Did you do any unnecessary damage along the way? Was there even a real significant problem to begin with? The third and last reflection is what I call the intrusive mailman analogy. When resolving my own anger problems, I found it very helpful to reconsider anger as an intrusive mailman. When anger appears, it always arises with a message for you about a possible problem in your life, like a mailman bringing a letter. But the weird thing about the intrusive mailman is that he insists on reading your mail with you and trying to solve the problems therein. The key here is that the mailman has no business trying to solve the problem with you. If you let the mailman into your home, you'll notice that he tends to start thinking that your home is his home. So he starts making a mess, throwing things around, using all of your dishes, and giving you extreme, often absurd suggestions for solutions to the problems in your mail. Just insult him, he says. That'll show him not to challenge your opinion. In the exact same sense, anger is not designed to help you find solutions. And when it arises with a message, it tries to enter your frontal cortex. And once it's in there, it creates total chaos and gives you really bad ideas. But if you can recognize the nature of anger, if you can realize that its only truly helpful role in your life is to hand you that message about a problem and then leave, that it's just an intrusive mailman, then you may start to respond to it differently. You might quickly realize that anger is always getting in the way when you let it in, obscuring your judgment, creating problems for you and your loved ones and everybody else around you. But you're the owner of your house, of your frontal cortex, and you can decide who enters and who solves problems with you. You can appreciate the mailman's delivery of the message and then send him on his way with a thank you. After that, you're free to work on the problem yourself. Okay, I hope this recording helped you in some way. I know with certainty that I'm a much happier and healthier person since I've taken the time with these reflections, so I'd encourage you to meditate on these ideas. And if you know anybody whom you think might appreciate these kinds of reflections or benefit from them, please share this episode with them. If these ideas helped me this much, I have to believe there are people out there who'd benefit similarly. As always, thanks so much for listening and have a great day.